who was in process? All those in favor?
Carrie.
Okay. Just like we do it in bylaw. Declarations of interest, that we don't do there. Anyways, do you have any declarations of interest? No approvals of the minutes, December the 19th. All those in favor of approving the minutes? I would just pick who was going to do it. Robert and then Maria. Excellent. Carried. So we have a presentation from staff on the disclosure of expenses. Councillor, you have the slide package in front of you, and you have it on the big screen. Who's leading us?
Okay, so because we met before, this is what we're coming back with. Bev and I worked with the web.
Sorry.
We worked with the web development team, and so they created this mock-up of what we are proposing here. Okay. So it's relatively automated because we were concerned about how much time this was going to take. So what we're going to show you can be done very quickly. And the web team has said that it could launch when they launch their web. They said in order to do it before that would be so much work for the 1 month, 2 months. Okay, so this is what it looks like. I guess there would be a link from the main page of the web page that would bring you to this. And of course the numbers are fictitious.
Obviously, we're really.
So this would show you
It's
these.
1 month.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a year for me.
That, and we don't have that heading on this because it's a mock-up, I guess, but this would be year-to-date. We're proposing year-to-date expenses there.
Yep.
So one for each, as you can see, the summary there. Now, then if you would click on one of these links, it will take you to this page. So we clicked on the mayor's link, and again, the numbers are fictitious. And this will give you the mayor's, all his accounts, and the totals again year-to-date. So then if you click on one, so it's pretty plain, okay? So it's going to be a web page. So whatever is on their template for their web page, which probably have the city logo or whatever else they decide, would also be on this page. So if we choose to pick like sponsorships, now, don't get too excited because this isn't going to go any deeper. But the web team suggested this screen, sponsorships, because they said they get a lot of requests for things like this. So this shows you the sponsorships for all the councillors, so that if a person is interested in that, we don't have to go and look at 16 different pages. So then if you clicked one of these again, one of these links, it would take you back to, it's the mayor's page. Items for consideration would be how often. Since this is relatively easy, I mean, it would not be a problem to put it up weekly, monthly. I mean, I think we was just monthly because we have monthly cutoffs in accounting. What would the roles and responsibilities of staff and councillors' offices be? I mean, would you like to review it ahead of time or what? I mean, pretty much it's accounting, so once it's in the system, it is what it is. If there's more detail, it would require us to do a technical evaluation and figure out, I mean, I think that would be a it would be a project. I don't know what the technology, we did meet with IT and they kind of had some ideas, but nothing, it would have to be built. And then there's AODA concerns. With what I just showed you, yes. With what we just showed you, there would be no concerns because the web team has got that figured out. But if we went further, for instance with pictures or whatnot, they were concerned. So that's my presentation. And I don't know what, I guess we need a decision to say move forward with this, put it up in the launch, or
Mr. Chair, it would go up to our standing committee.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for the presentation. My question is, just in the back of the slide that you had where it shows all the office expense listing, have and no problem with that. There's some items on here that aren't normally on, not that there's a problem, but are we going to remove, like, computer hardware, that's under our office,
Okay.
and cell phone,
Yep,
just, those come under our office budget, that does, this is basically all the items that come under
Okay.
the audit finance report every year, correct?
no. No, it's not quite the same.
Okay, so I noticed though that for computer hardware and for cell phone, you've got them, like, there's just
Okay.
blanks, is there a reason?
Yes, well, because these are
So-
these are the accounts that were chosen by, I don't know, by
So we're gonna
us.
be showing those, I have no problem with that, I'm just questioning.
Yeah, those are the ones that are chosen, but certainly we can take ones off, that would be not a problem. Computer hardware, like, we had 0, so that will show up as 0 in most places, so that's possibly one that should be come off.
Well, I'm just questioning because computer hardware, there's computer, there's our telephone, there's our telephone lines, there's our admin assistance equipment, I mean.
So that, this account is something different, this account is if you go out and buy something.
Oh, I see, okay, just want to be sure because the public won't know that and they don't understand that
Yes,
there's more than just my computer in my office that's under that budget.
and it's, yeah.
Didn't call something else.
Well, I mean, so I maybe suggest,
What's it intended to capture?
Correct.
yes.
Yes.
So I think maybe the web team could put some kind of descriptions as to
Thank you.
what is
That would be great, yeah.
included in,
Yeah,
and that would be,
perfect.
okay?
Like I understand, I just purchased a printer
Yes,
for my
that would
office,
go in
so
there.
that would go in
So
there. and I
this isn't your
understand
daily,
that. Right.
yeah,
It's not the blanket of our office.
yes, this
Setup.
is something,
Anything
different.
over and above that. Perfect. That's what I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
But that brings up a good point, and they should identify what goes into each of these probably, have a little definition.
Just so the public's not misled to believe, well, how come this counselor has something and this counselor doesn't,
Yes.
right? Okay, thank you.
Councilor Pursuit?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, going back to when you click on sponsorships, will it show each organization or person you
No.
sponsored? No?
No.
Okay. And travel expenses too then?
Same.
Be the same?
These don't go any deeper than the total
It's just a total
expenses.
number?
Now, at the end of the year, Bev Meals Department does your annual expense, the report that goes to council,
Mm-hmm.
the remuneration report, and that would be somehow linked to one of these pages when it gets posted.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilor Pursuit, you want to take the chair?
Yes.
So we have base expenditures which are considered salary for staff, benefits for staff, things along that line. Landline is considered a part of your base charges, correct? What also is a part of that base charge? We have a computer in our office and that connection, the internet connection, all that is base.
That's right.
Is cell a part of that base or is cell separate?
It's part of
Part of the base.
I'm sorry?
It's part of the,
It's part of the base? Because these are the things that are simply required to do business.
that's right.
Am I missing anything else that's in there? Chargebacks for your office space, do
No.
we don't get that here. I don't know about the outlying areas where they have offices. I'm trying to think, is there anything else? Parking, is that a base cost?
Yeah.
Parking's provided, but I'm not sure where it's accounted for.
That, it's not on this list.
It's not on that list.
No. You could have this
Yeah, you
list
could.
reflect the same as what we do the remuneration report on as well.
Well, and that's
Well, that's-
kind of where I'm getting to is there has to be some consistency or you're just gonna confuse
Right.
people. So they need to be able, at the end of the day, to be able to add up our discretionary costs, which is, in my opinion, this is discretionary, so. And then our base cost, that's our total office budget. And we have a total office budget per ward based on population, and we have to be below that number. Is that not correct?
That's right.
So somehow we should be able to do that. I don't know how.
Okay, so,
Perhaps that annually, when the base number, when we get our overall, we could indicate the base budget for each ward.
I'm sure we could incorporate it, the overall base budget into this.
Just so people understand that there's two
And
different,
explain-
or even a note indicating that base budget is
Yes,
the following,
what is it and what is it?
depending on the population of the wards, something to that effect. This is new, people will ask lots of questions, so we need to be able to frame it in such a manner. And Mr. Chairman, can I just ask whoever was doing the, if we could boop down further to the next one of those? No, go back up. So pick, I think it was going, this is your budget, then it went to the different accounts. If you open up an account, then it went to the charges.
Right, so here's where we start. Well,
Okay.
the start would be the main page.
Okay, so this is the main page, so
This is the
let's
first
go into Mayor Patina's, see what he's spending. So
Uh-huh.
this is everything that he's spending, and we want to look at sponsorships, so let's pop the sponsorships. And that's what we get,
Yeah,
and that's all we get.
yeah.
So he could have,
So this isn't actually just the mayor, you see, this is everybody's.
I understand that, but he could have $5,000 in expenses, but it doesn't break it down further than that.
No.
And I don't think the summary report, the first page where it shows 1,000, that's not a budget, that's spending.
That's actual.
That's the
actual
expenditure.
spending.
Yes.
So the public can't click that and then see that I went to the Winona Peach Festival for
No.
$150 or whatever the case is. Why is that? Why isn't it? 'Cause that's truly proactive
Yes,
disclosure.
It's a technology, we don't have a technology. This is all based on actual reports that come out of the PeopleSoft system. We don't
So
have.
let me stop you there.
Mhm.
So imagine for a moment if I click on, you click on my name
mhm,
and it's under sponsorships and I spent $500 or whatever the case is, and then it opens up and then it has the names of for each bill. We can't do that?
at the moment, we
No.
can't automatically do that.
Not through our system, it would
Yes.
require, so through the chair, it would require someone manually scanning that information and somehow posting it to a file or to the site. But there's no way through our system to be able to extract that information and have it easily available for viewing.
So is it, I'm someone in the community that wants to see what I spent sponsorship on, how do I get that information? Can I call to get that information? I mean, proactive disclosure, what I had in mind, perhaps what I've seen across the country, that it'll core down to this actual photocopy of a bill and show you exactly what was going on. This doesn't really show us anything.
So I think through the chair, the council identified it's the photocopy. It's someone has manually scanned the information and in some way posted it to the website. So it'd just be a more manual process rather than being able to extract the information from the reporting or the system that we currently have.
And so that wasn't contemplated just because of the additional cost to do that.
And through the chair, the cost, and then we would have to identify roles, responsibilities, who would be responsible for scanning that information and posting that information. And in terms of timelines, we would have to work through the web team, just in terms of coordinating that as part of the web project, because they would have to build in the capacity of somehow being able to post that information. And just, it's not that it could be able to, but we'd have to be sensitive to their timelines.
And we're not doing this just for the councilors, this is for senior management also?
Right. So through the chair, that was the original report spoke to senior management starting in 2015, as we needed to, as I believe I mentioned at a previous meeting, we needed to restate the budgets, break down the budgets of the general managers and their AAs versus other staff in some of the GM's budgets. I believe there's one GM budget, there's only 2 people. The other budgets have more staffing that we need to separate out and create two deputies essentially.
I'll take the chair back and I'll hear from the rest of my colleagues.
Councilor Pearson.
Yes, thank you. So just on that same line of question from Chair Clark, was at the end of the year when we do the audit finance report, does it not lay out though those, as he's saying, when we buy tickets, say to the Peach Festival or retirement events, they're listed in the audit finance report.
Yes.
So that material is gathered. It's just that you don't scan and put all the bills in.
That's right. That comes from the detailed GL transaction, and it's based on whatever description is put on a check requisition when it's sent over. And you know how before we send out the remuneration report, we always send all that back up because sometimes there's confidential information on there that councillors like to remove names. But if it's on the check rec, it gets keyed into the system. So we wouldn't want to just go down one more layer to a detailed transaction listing because there would be a lot of things there that
Right, okay.
would just probably raise a lot more questions.
But the information is available
Yes.
at the end of the year, or also the beginning of the new year, when we do that final statement.
Yes.
And can that be posted?
The report?
Correct.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
That is posted,
That
that
is
is
posted.
posted.
good, excellent, thank you.
Councilor Whitehead.
Yeah, the system's not broken in the sense that this is not about the fact that these budgets are being breached, that they're going over budget, and therefore we need to do something to create more accountability.
So through the chair, we just presented our unaudited 2013 year end, and the legislative budget came in underspent relative, so the actuals were underspent relative to budget. So that's not the issue. The issue, as I understand it, is just providing additional information over and above the current staff report.
So people are spending money to budget or below budget.
Through the chair in 2013 below budget.
Just want to make sure that's part of the public record. Thank you.
And that has been for the last 8 years. Well,
So it's not broken.
the other term, no. Okay, so I guess we need some decisions from this body.
Do you need a motion, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, we will need a motion, and I guess we can actually speak to the item itself, so Councilor Pearson, you want to put it on the floor and...
Well, I'll move, Mr. Chairman, that staff be directed to process the disclosure of expenses on the web has been presented today, and ongoing review as we move forward of what can be added into the future. But at least this gives us a good start. So I'll move that, Mr. Chairman.
And that means it's going up to the standing committee, because we don't direct here.
Yes.
The standing committee would be GIC. Who's the standing, audit finance? Okay. Yeah, go
Mr.
ahead.
Chair, we could put on an invite for all members of council to attend, if they wanted to see.
That would be very good.
Mr. Chair, could I also suggest that we actually say that the items as presented, these are the items, the categories that you would like to go up.
Yes, I can add that. And that the process reflect these items going forward.
Is someone seconding it? Okay, Councilor Pursuta, Councilor Whitehead.
I just ask, I don't have my reading glasses, so I don't have the categories here.
Don't mind.
They're all.
We'll flip it back.
There's a little line, I'm sorry, but my daughter went to Ottawa, so I had to,
Well, it's still small. I brought it.
Don't mind one. 150.
Well, we put it on the screen anyway, so we can see
so
what's on it.
I think I'm more focused on,
Oh, look, they made a special one for you.
yeah.
Where's my
Well, I
camera?
thought, this is pretty small.
It's a great shot for your campaign literature right there.
So cellular phones, you're gonna post just the cost? My concern is that there's a Privacy Act issue, and we need to protect those numbers. I use my cellular phone, I advertise it, so the general public utilize my cellular phone, so there might be a higher frequency of activity. So I'm a little concerned about there's not a set policy in regards to the access to cell phones, so you might see a higher level of activity in one ward versus another based on how that council approaches the process. So I would hope that where there are differences in the approach, that we can have some kind of an asterisk to identify that issue, because from a general public point of view, if I look and see a cellular phone that is up really high, well, why is Councillor Whitehead's cell phone call costs are so high, and say Councillor Clark's are so low? Well, clearly the difference might be that I advertise and promote my cell phone for access to the councillor.
Through the chair, so just keeping in mind that we have a corporate plan as it relates to cell phones, and so there are some sharing of time in that, so we can review, but I expect that, unless there's some especially extraordinary use, is that there'd be some uniformity in terms of the expenses as it
Can you
relates
just
to cell
clarify the sharing of the cost?
So in terms of, through the chair, in terms of the corporate plan, what was negotiated at the urging of council in terms of the last contract was some improved value to the taxpayers, and in part that was achieved by allowing, in terms of the corporation as a whole, where one particular user underutilizes relative to the plan, is their minutes can be shared with other users. I think it's a common practice among smaller corporations. The providers provide that, and it's similarly provided to the City of Hamilton. So to the Councillor Whitehead's point, where there may be some extraordinary use in one particular month, that may be compensated by another individual in the corporation, or the corporation as a whole pulled together, where the use may be underutilized. So to the councillor's point, in terms of expense dollar terms, there would be uniformity, even though a particular councillor's minutes may be high because of the level of contact with their constituents. From an expense point of view, is there would be some uniformity.
Again, but that distinction in some form or fashion should be identified, because if this is about accountability and transparency, we need to ensure that those viewing the information understand the differential in the approach relative to those particular accounts. If they don't, then it does create a little bit of fodder and misunderstandings and so forth. So I just want to make sure that if we're going down this road, that we better clearly identify that the policies may be different, or the operations might be different, or the practices may be different from one department to another, or from one councillor's office to another. Another example is meeting expenses. I mean, some councillors don't necessarily have a lot of meetings. Others do. I have 22 community meetings a year. I have issue-oriented meetings. I have development meetings. I have budget meetings. So I'm pretty active in Westcliff Mall meetings. So clearly those expenses would be fairly high. But I think that the number of meetings need to be clearly identified so that people understand the trade-off between the cost and what is actually that councilor's objective.
So through the chair, staff had similar discussions on that issue. As you may recall from the annual report that we provide to committee as it relates to expenses, there is a opportunity for narrative. And going forward, as I mentioned before, in terms of roles, responsibilities, rather than staff just posting information without the opportunity of identifying the factors contributing to those, that's what we would want to develop going forward, is an opportunity to provide the factors that are affecting a particular expense or a difference in terms of expenses. So again, as you recall from the staff annual report that goes to committee, there is a narrative that describes whether a particular councillor participates on AMO or FCM or other obligations that are contributing to higher than average expenses.
Just going into the FCM piece, when I ran for the board, obviously I used some expenses for advertising material so that I can obviously get elected on the board, which I successfully did on 3 occasions. And obviously that impacted my budget to some degree, and yet that may not necessarily be reflected in those cost expenses because of that additional, with Councillor Powers, for example, the additional responsibility have relative to those organizations. So we will be identifying.
Yeah, so through the chair, that's something we're very conscious of, rather than just posting the information. If there is a level of reporting going forward that requires some narrative, is that we would work with committee and with councillors in terms of the opportunity to provide that narrative as to what factors are contributing to that trend.
Great. And I see consulting services. Help me understand what is actually, because this can end up into a personnel type issue as well, so help me understand what is actually being posted here, just the cost?
Through the chair, just the cost.
Thank you.
Okay, so to Councillor, if you want to take the chair,
Yes.
somebody, to Councillor Whitehead's point, on the cell phones, is it the exact same dollar value that's being charged to each councillor?
Through the chair, yes, and to staff as well. So it's a similar plan, not only across the councillors, but across the legislative and the staff budgets.
So regardless of the number of minutes, because of the way that the contract is written, if I'm using the landline more than someone else, then my cell phone costs are transferred to others who are using the cell phone more because they may have a larger board geographically.
Yeah, through the chair, just to be clear, if a particular councillor or staff person is underutilizing, the cost is still shown. In the
Yep.
Councillor Clark's example, the cost would still be borne in Councillor Clark's budget,
Correct.
but he's providing capacity minutes to others who require who exceed that usage.
Yep. And that was passed by council, right, made that decision.
I think long distance is treated differently.
Yeah, sorry, long distance, but again, it's a marginal amount.
Yeah. So, and could we attach again, because this is a click down system, one of the click downs when we get into each council, we went to the sponsorship and it shows the value in the mirror. In his, it could have note one, like in a audited financial statement, we have notes, so notes, and it would indicate that he represents us on the large urban municipality mayors or whatever the case is, and you're on XCM and someone else is up, so there's additional costs incurred in that file.
So through the chair, we can look at providing some narrative
Yes.
in terms of why a particular councillor or mayor's budget may be exceeding the average, what's contributing to that. We can look at providing an opportunity for some of that narrative, as we do in the staff report.
Is there an advantage to assist, I don't know how far we go on this, but I'm talking now, my ward has a smaller population than Councillor Whitehead's ward. He's what, almost double, aren't you? Can we put in an area where it shows the ward budget? Because a lot of things that we do here are costed, but his budget would be larger than mine because of the fact that he has it's just built in that way. So somewhere we need to put in a notation that the budgets are developed based on the number of and that might be at the beginning of the program.
So through the chair, I think the reference to where we place it, whether it's at the beginning, is important. So this would be captured under legislative, which has various reports, and so we can look to provide that context as part of that web page in terms of other relevant information as people are reviewing the expense information, the size of the budget, as well as the annual remuneration report would be posted to that website as well.
Okay, I think it's a huge step forward. It may not be exactly where we want to be, but it is a huge step forward, so I'll take the chair back.
Councillor Pearson.
Council Person and Council Whitehead, thank you.
Thank you, and just, because Mike just touched on that, we have our webpage that each councillor has. That might be another spot that this information can go in right at the bottom, that, kind of gives the outline of the ward, it gives the geographical sort of bit of information, and that would be the population in our budgets, or possibly budget amount could be put in there.
So through the chair, we did discuss that. That's something that we can discuss with the web team, recognizing some councillors have web pages, some may not, is that we would provide that opportunity to link this information if the councillor wishes. But at a minimum, it would be posted to the city's legislative page, so it would be available to the general public.
Council Whitehead.
Well, I'm already, I think Councillor Collins, not sure who else is doing it, but the area rating money I'm posting on my website anyway. Again, for accountability and transparency, exactly how the money's being spent, and if they have criticisms on whatever it is, at least they get to see how we got there and what is being spent. So we're already taking those steps as councillors, and I certainly have no problem reiterating. I don't like links, by the way. I'd rather have the full PDF pages, and so that when they go to my website, it's not going linked to the legislative page. I'd rather them have complete access to those expenditures because I don't know where we're going with our website, the city's website. I don't know how easy and approachable and how busy it's going to be, but I know that our websites are a little more, those that do have them, aren't as complex and don't have as many pages and a lot more accessible. So I would rather, as opposed to a link, the ability to actually put that PDF or whatever straight onto my section that's identified as councillor's budget or expenditures.
So through the chair, we can work with the councillors in terms of the form that they would like that information made available to the website.
The second piece is it's sort of touching on the different population challenges in the budgets. To me, there's a per capita spending, and that's probably a little bit more relative to the constituents. So what's my councillor spending? Regardless if I have 60,000 or you got 30,000, what's the per capita spending? Is there any way that we could break out the budget so that shows what was budgeted for per capita per ward?
Through the chair, we can look at that information, I think, in terms of
As
the
contextual.
legislative website. Recognizing budget is different than expense. These are actual expenses versus budget. So we can look at, providing some level of reporting in terms of budget per capita or however committee would like to normalize that. We can maybe at a future date come back in terms of that context, in terms of the legislative page, and provide some options.
And I think that the reason I think it's important is people need to understand, whether it's benchmarking or otherwise, that when you take a look and actually break those budgets down, the overall board councillors' budgets per capita, it's going to tell a story in itself. And I think that's a story worth telling, quite frankly. So that's why I think it's important in that preempt stuff to give context that is in fact broken down.
So through the chair, we can work with the committee in terms of drafting up some levels of reporting that we could provide through that legislative page.
Okay, and so are we okay moving forward for June and July timeframe, or because we've requested a number of things to be added in, so I want to make sure that we're not
Yeah, so through the chair,
piece of cake, right? Come on, it's
through the chair, I'd like to work through the web redevelopment team. I don't want to interrupt the work and the progress they're making on, and we can provide an update to the next subcommittee meeting in terms of the timelines that they can achieve. I want to recognize that team. Actually, this was a group effort of a number of staff, Janie, Bev, and the web development team, and it was actually some great effort in terms of being able to extract this level of information and do so in a way that we hope is meaningful through the webpage. So, but through the chair, we can work with the web team to try to do it as soon as possible and provide an update. Again, the objective would be as soon as possible. We just don't want to interrupt the progress they're making in terms of the web redevelopment.
Based on that, I mean, that's great. But if we can do the fundamentals and back to that PDF, I'd rather go sooner than later in regards to my own website. So I don't want, and I understand the argument you're putting forward, so understanding that, if there's a way that us as councillors can take that information through that, I guess it's called the back, what's it called, the back room, and put it in the front room in regards to our websites, that'd be great.
Mr. Chairman, so on the back page down here, it's got roles and responsibilities of staff and council's offices. So looking at this moving forward, our administrative assistants, mine's Lynn, Christine, Rob, Colleen, what would they have to do anything different than they're doing now?
So through the chair, I don't expect they would be doing anything differently than they're doing now. They would just reconfirm the expenses are appropriate in terms of where they're being booked. And going forward, if we expand the level of reporting, so for instance, as Councillor Clark made reference to where someone photocopies a receipt, well, in those examples, someone has to black out the credit card number so that it's not public information. So it's just a made reference going forward is the level of privacy needs to be adhered to. And so in terms of the current practices, I don't expect this will create any additional effort, councillors and their staff review their expenses on a regular basis and ensure that they're being booked to the appropriate accounts. And I would expect that would just continue going forward.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just, Councilor Pursuit, you take the chair. Just, I want to, sorry, the vice chair, take the chair. We had a coup when you weren't here. I wasn't part of it, but I became the chair for this meeting only.
Just remember, there's an election in September.
How can I forget? So, I guess I want to thank the staff for all the work that they've done on this, because this has been a long, arduous journey going through this stuff to actually figure out where we were going on it. It started as a motion at one of the council meetings that I think Councilor White had seconded it actually. And it actually came from conversations that we had with the privacy commissioner in terms of how they were doing things now in their office. So proactive disclosure and access by design, privacy of design were those basic principles that have now been adopted right across the city. So I'm really pleased with where we are. Of course, we'd always like to have the best and the most information, but it's perhaps challenging to try and do it all at once. It might be easier to start running with what we've got, or walking with what we've got, and then start running later on with more information. So I do want to support the motion going forward, and I really want to thank the staff, especially just Garrick and his staff. This has been a bit challenging trying to work through it all and make sure that in the middle of a web review, I can't even say that, review of the web, that we can actually do all these things. So I'm very happy and pleased as the original mover of the motion. And I guess we need a vote then. All those in
That's the chair, right?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And all those in favor?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. You want to take over now, or
Now I can take over.
why don't you do that?
So, Madam Clerk, I don't have a work, review agenda in front of me.
No, I was just flying by the seat of my pants and doing rather well until you came in. Here we go.
Front page.
Thank you.
That's next.
Take a Commissioner bylaw amendments to section 22, and I see we have our, take a Commissioner here, so, that is our staff report, or 5.1. So there's recommendations before us, and I'm looking for a commentary, Councilor Virginia.
If you want staff to give you a report,
Sure. Lisa?
Very quickly, Mr. Bassey is here, as you can see, respond to your questions. As he was, the integrity commissioner went through the process of reporting with the new time limit in place for the first time, there were a couple bumpers along the way. He was directed to come back and report on them. That has been done with Mr. Bassey's advice, and that's the two amendments in the amending bylaw that you see already. One to do with the time limit, and the other to do with how increased time limit is
Thank you.
presented to. So that in a nutshell is what's happening.
Okay, so, Mr. Bass, do you have any further comments on what's being recommended here?
No, the recommendation is to go from really 2 months, 60 days to 4 months. And the reason behind that is that just there are things happening that I can't always get to interview the complainant because of their schedule or mine. And I've had cases where I haven't been able to see them almost a month. Well, their month is gone because of their schedule or mine. Can't get together, sit down, because I need to evaluate the complainant to ensure it's not frivolous or vexatious prior to conducting any investigation. So as a result of issues such as that, as well as the complexity of some of the investigations, can cause a great deal of time to go through them. I am by myself. I have no other assistance unless I need some expert assistance. But I've had direction from council that I'm the integrity commissioner and I should be conducting all the investigations. So when you get investigation, and it's a time constraint. And I can work with anything that you come up with, but we thought 2 months was just simply not enough for 4 months of work. Much better.
I do have questions, maybe, but
Thank you, Mr. Bassey, thank you, Lisa and Rose. I just wanted to, I have no problem with the bylaw in front of us. The bylaw says though that where the integrity commission has received a complaint regarding a member of council, they shall within 120 days of receiving the complaint. I just want to verify that that's not what the report says. The report says at the conclusion of an investigation. So am I reading this differently? I have no problem with what's in the bylaw, but the report actually says at the conclusion, so there could be a difference in time span, if I'm not mistaken. Saying that after the conclusion of an investigation, it's 60 to 120 days. In the report part, page 2 of 2.
I think that's a little holdover of the older language, and I apologize for that. I think in effect they are the same thing. When a report's filed, the investigation is concluded.
I just want to be sure that the
Yes.
report reflects
Yes.
what we discussed, that for the public, viewing public, and anybody reading
Yes.
this, there's not a miscommunication on what's being in the report and what the bylaw says.
Yes,
Because that
it's
makes
a
it
cut and paste.
Through the chair, if I could, you normally, when the report goes to council, it's at the conclusion of the investigation. However, in this case, if the investigation is to take longer than the time frame that's specified, then there will be a report to council, and it will not necessarily be the conclusion of it.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm satisfied with the directions.
So I'll take chair back, pass it to Councillor Clark. I guess I got just some questions in the original development. I was part of that. The idea was that we don't leave investigations ongoing, and understand that we didn't want to interfere with the comprehensive nature of investigations. The caveat was that we would put in the bylaw that if it appeared that you couldn't hit that 60-day timeline, then we couldn't unreasonably withhold an extension at the request of the Integrity Commissioner. So I guess the question I have now is, understanding that the ability was always there to extend the investigative period from 60 days to what may ever be needed, depending on what individual case, and the fact that the council is trying to, again, hold the feet to the fire in regards to concluding these processes. What was wrong with that particular language?
Well, it saves the report, actually, is what it is. If I can complete the investigation within, say, 4 months instead of the 2 months, but it would take longer than 2, so that I can just make that one report. I don't have to compile another report to council at the 2-month period and then indicating there is a take longer period. So it's just strictly a matter of extending the period for the investigation.
Madam Clerk?
Mr. Chair, through you, the current language actually said that council would actually have to make the decision to grant the extension. So I think that's where council felt that they shouldn't be put in that position, because it could be, subject of an investigation that's ongoing. So to remove that from the current language, it's the Integrity Commission would just advise.
I think Lisa knows, because she was part of the development of this. The intent wasn't to tie the hand of the Integrity Commissioner. It was, again, to leave that backdrop that we wanted shorter time frames for conclusion of these investigations, unless circumstances wouldn't allow it. And the language, even that language, as opposed to this language, could simply be changed to that we couldn't sort of withhold but you would actually provide a written request to council asking for the extension based on A, B, and Z relative to, or you don't even have to get too specific, but obviously that you couldn't have it done in 60 days. It's just, again, it's just holding the feet to the fire relative to timelines of the investigation. And I thought leaving that door, the ability to open that door for the Integrity Commissioner was achieving 2 things. There's maintaining that sort of framework where we're trying to get this done sooner than later, but also understanding and appreciating that some investigations may be more complex and there might be legitimate reasons for the extensions, and then you'll be making that extension request. What we're doing here now is automatically foregoing that type of solution and moving to 120 days, which is double the number of days, and we went through a lot of consultation, by the way, to get to that 60 days. So now we're more than doubling it, well, not more than doubling it, but we're doubling it. And the question I have is, if it can't be done then, what is the language? Help me understand. I don't know if he needs an extension from the 120 days. What is that process?
Through the
Yeah, I
chair,
understand.
it's essentially the process that existed. There's still a requirement to report back with an explanation to keep council informed about why this is continuing beyond a time. Certainly, given the underlying authority, that the integrity commissioner has to be independent. As you're indicating, this was always the case, but it wasn't necessarily crystal clear on the face of the bylaw, the way that they've been put into the bylaw. So it's the two that does explain what happens at that point. And essentially, the change in one is from 60 days to 120.
Okay. I don't see here that the council can unreasonably withhold the request for the extension.
It isn't a request.
It's just advised.
So it's advised.
So could we not use the same language on the 60 days?
Yes. The 120, the same language could be used for a
Section two.
shorter or a longer period.
Section 2, 60 days, and then you still maintain the opportunity for the integrity commissioner to advise that more time would be required for the particular investigations that are ongoing, correct?
Yes, that would be a change to 22 sub 1.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I guess again, I'm trying to understand. 4 months is like, we're getting to half a year period. That's a long time for anyone to sit in a bubble, quite frankly. And I'm quite open and frank, as a person that sat in the bubble, it's not a pleasant place to be.
I understand.
And to suggest that we're going to double the time frame, to me, is not, I wouldn't wish that upon anyone, quite frankly. So to me, my desire is to not interfere with the needs of the integrity commissioner. I want to make sure that's clear. And clearly, if the integrity commissioner needs an extension from the 60 days, that we couldn't withhold that. But that at least it's just part of holding the feet to the fire that we make that request under this section 2, as we have here for 120 days. And then hopefully, if it's not 60 days, it's not automatically 4 months either. And so based on the way I read this, it could be automatically 120 days before we see a report after a complaint is filed. And to me, that's a long time and maybe unnecessary, especially if the investigation is fairly simplistic. And it doesn't say here that on those type of investigations that you would or could come before the 120 days to put your disposition in front of council. So either way, I'm looking for the sort of the compromise between what's here and balancing the concerns I've raised. Does it need to be 120 days, or could we put leave the 120 days and then, but say that in cases that are straightforward and simple, that the integrity commissioner will endeavor to bring those. You're not locked in the 120 days. You endeavor to bring it before the 120 days if practical.
If I could, I have no thought that a minor investigation is going to take 120 days. I'd get it done as quickly as I could and into council whenever it's finished. And if it's 60 days, 20 days, 80 days, whatever it is, it would come before council. It's just that 120 was the number, because 60 was the number when a report had to be filed with council. And this just extends that. But it doesn't mean I would slow down my investigations to extend them into 120 days because I now have them.
So help me then, for Mr. Staff or Mr. Bassi, help me understand then the fact that there's no wording that suggests earlier than 120 days. It's just 120 days. That my comfort level is there with that type of language, maybe Lisa, relative to reports that could in fact come much earlier.
Through the chair, the within does not make it 120 days. I can certainly look at alternatives that capture the same idea that the standard sort of drafting is within. It doesn't say at 120 days.
I mean, I've represented workers a long time, Lisa, and I know that language, shall, will, you, Councilor Clark knows that too. This is pretty generic language, so it really, I don't think I understand technically you're right, but I don't think that it's strong enough in the context that we're not endorsing that all reports come in 4 months. If a report can come earlier, we would encourage it to come earlier, and I want that some way or some form or fashion to be spelt out in that particular language. In the absence of that, then really, whoever the integrity commissioner is, can technically argue that, I had 120 days and I took advantage of it. Not that you would, but that language allows it.
Through the chair, I can certainly look at more specific language and have that if you choose to send this on to AF and they have that ready when that goes forward.
So, Mr. Chair, I think we need to find that compromise that's here. I respect and appreciate the need, especially for the more complex cases. I don't want to tie the hands of the Integrity Commission. At the same time, as Councillor Jackson indicated, we certainly know what it's like a longer time that anyone is in a bubble until the conclusion of that investigation takes place. So obviously, we're trying to strike that balance without compromising the integrity of the investigation. And I think that in this case, the compromise would be to provide the 120 days for those more complex cases, but have some language that clearly identifies that there's a real desire to bring those more straightforward cases forward much in advance of the 120 days, even if it could be the original 60 days. Would be preferable, because the way it is here now, it seems to me that the language indicates, even though it says within, that 120 days you'll see your report regardless of the complexity of the report. Not that that's the desire of the Integrity Commission, but we can never guarantee you all here, you're going to be the Integrity Commission into perpetuity, right? So my issue is not about the individual, it's about the language. The language, to me, just grants too much flexibility, and it needs to be a little tighter to try and meet those objectives. I'm hearing from Mr. Massey that it was never the intention to take the simpler cases and drag it out to 120 days. So if that's his intention, then clearly there's got to be some language that we can reflect that could do both. Provide that latitude on those more complex cases, but really not lose the objective of having cases that can come to council sooner. So those are my comments, Mr. Chair. And
Chair, Councilor Pursuit, and myself.
Councilor Sue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Bassey. So, Mr. Bassey, you're asking for more time. Do you have more than one complaint going on at a time?
Yes.
Up to how many? Maybe more than?
I have had as many as 5.
So maybe it's 5 at one time, so I can understand we need more time to juggle these back and forth and make the arrangements. And through Mr. Chair too, and just a little bit of homework here. So you take general inquiries from people too, and that necessary complaint, they
Yes.
call you to question and
Yes, I respond to probably 15, 20 a year of people that call up and like information about this has happened, that's happened, and I talk to them about it. I have come down and visited with them, and because we really don't get a sense over the phone, and I don't recommend one way or the other a complaint. I just explain the process to them, explain what they have to do, and they make their own decisions. But I've had a number where they've called, and when after I walked away, there were no complaints from them. So I do respond to that. I also respond to council. When council needs advice or guidance in relation to conflicts of interest or other things like that. So I do respond to any council that has a question regarding the process, regarding some conduct they may perceive to be doing, and just to get an explanation of that they may or may not be in compliance. And just to explain what all the rules of the code of conduct are. Sometimes
So what I'm hearing is you could potentially get 3 complaints this week, and you need 120 days to get through them, because you got a lot to juggle here. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bassett.
That's correct.
Thank you. Just some questions for Mr. Bassi first. So did I hear you that you provide comments, I guess would be the best way, general comments about the bylaw and the act to citizens?
Yes.
And you said approximately 20, did I hear that? Or how many last year?
I'm coming off the top of my head, but it'd be around 15 to 20 at the end of the year is what I'm going.
And is that in your report, your annual report?
Yes.
And you're indicating that also?
Yeah.
Okay. With regards to the councillors, how many times are you providing written advice or comments to the councillors about potential conflicts?
About 10 or 12.
Okay. The issue of making a decision, a preliminary decision up front as to whether or not an item or complaint is frivolous or vexatious, how do you go about that?
I review the material that's presented to me in the original complaint. I also call the complainant, interview the complainant, and then from that generally make the decision at that time, if I can, if it's frivolous or vexatious. It's not always apparent right at the start. But by the end of the investigation process, I will know if it is frivolous or vexatious, and it could then become just reported as such.
And how many complaints, I guess last year, were deemed to be frivolous and vexatious and never went further than the original interview with the complainant?
That didn't go further than the interview with the complainant? I think one.
Okay. How many complaints did you get last year?
4? Last year? 4? 2, 4.
So one of the things, and I understand the act, I mean the act gives you sole discretion. You're in essence an independent officer of the chamber for all intents and purposes.
Right.
But the challenge that the councillors are experiencing over and above individuals who may be before you is that the public doesn't understand why it would take more than 60 days to do a report. So can you clarify or perhaps elaborate on what you actually do once you deem that there may be a prima facie case? How do you investigate? What do you have to do?
I develop an investigation plan of where my next steps are going to be. I contact the counselor to make sure that they're aware that there is a complaint has been made to them or about them. I then interview the counselor to get their reaction, initial reaction. From that, both the complainant, the counselor, and the documents that I receive, I then find other avenues of investigation, interview staff, interview outside sources if necessary, and find documentation that will, that is relevant to the investigation. Examine all that documentation, and then provide from that and from the interviews, then provide a report. We've had as many as 40 interviews on one file, so it's issues like that that cause the
Okay, so you've had as many as 40 interviews in one file, but do you have an average?
wow.
Or is that difficult?
Everyone's
It's different. Everyone's different.
Everyone is really different. And some I get very little documentation, others I get a lot. It just depends on the complaint that is made.
How do you define a lot? I'm sorry to ask all these questions, but I'm trying to, this is being taped and the media are here, the public are trying to understand exact, and I'm not trying to be disparaging, but they're trying to understand what you do. There are some in the community that think that your job is a complete waste of taxpayers' money, that they ultimately make the decision and then hire and fire the councillors. And so it's important that they understand all of your responsibilities and what you do for the councillors and for the city.
My responsibility is really the enforcement of the code of conduct, which council has put together. I have 4 basic responsibilities. One is education of council. I keep up to date on other judgments that are made and other integrity commissioners. Last year we had a meeting here in Hamilton with all the integrity commissioners from Ontario. I hosted it, and we came in and we spent a day together talking about issues related to integrity. So I have an education in that respect. I also provide advice and guidance to council when they call up and want advice on certain matters. Conflict of interest becomes probably one of the major issues that I get called on. Now, I do not enforce a municipal conflict of interest act. That's enforced by a court. What I enforce is the code of conduct, and I look at conflict of interest within the context of the code of conduct. And that's my decisions, or that's where I gather the information on that, in that respect. Third is the investigation of complaints that are received from the public or from council. And the fourth is the adjudication of those complaints. And mostly integrity commissioners just make recommendations to council on any sanctions that result from their investigations. I'm a little different in that I adjudicate them as well. And those are the 4 areas of which I provide services to council. And when it comes down to, you say, documentation is normally measured in inches. And we get some files that when you receive documentation, financial statements, letters, emails, all these documents which are available from municipality, from the website. I'm always reviewing council meetings, because during the council meetings is when some of the complaints arise from conduct within the council meeting, and it's reviewing that. It takes a long time to go through all that, because we just don't know exactly where in that council meeting a certain thing happened. In other issues, it's committee meetings. I look at committee meetings where there have been complaints, and the minutes from the committee meetings, and the streaming of the committee meetings. And it's a time process. It takes time to do these kinds of things. So, but after the investigation plan is developed and I know where I'm going, I then take steps. Now that investigation plan is dynamic. It changes as I follow through it, and I go and interview who I need to go. At the end of it all, I compile all the information I have, put it together, review it all. If I need any more investigation or need to interview others, I interview them at that time, and then I start to compile a report. And depending on the report, I try to keep them as simple as I can, but a lot of them don't always reflect the amount of work that's gone in behind to come up with that report. But that's essentially the process.
At the preliminary stage where you're dealing through, Mr. Chairman, the frivolous and vexatious, do you also look at a complaint at the preliminary stage as to whether or not it's within your mandate, or whether or not it should be going to the police department or going to a courtroom?
I keep that in mind throughout the investigation, starting right when I receive the complaint. If there's an issue that is a criminal nature, it will go directly, I will refer it directly to the police department.
Have you had to do that yet?
No, I have not. And at that time, I would then withdraw from the process.
Right.
It would then become a police matter.
Yes.
But I always do keep that in mind, and
How do you reconcile the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act with the municipal act that creates your position?
well, how do I reconcile it?
Conflict of Interest Act, which
Right.
indicates for the most part, it's not really that prescriptive. And it's a judge that makes the decision on a conflict of interest.
Yes.
Are you dealing with cases that are alleged to be conflicts of interest, or are you dealing with code of conduct cases only?
I
Yeah,
deal
so
with,
if I can help, in the formulation of the bylaw is pretty clear, at least you can help me. When it came to criminal, or it came to other legislative issues such as the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, that wasn't the role of the Detective Commissioner investigate, it was his responsibility to forward to those appropriate, whatever, departments.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I want to make sure that he's doing that.
I would advise the client, the customer, or the complainant, I would advise the complainant that this is actually a conflict of interest issue that comes under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and the complainant would have to take his own steps to proceed with that. The conflict of interest that I look at is within the context of the Code of Conduct, because within the Code of Conduct, and I don't have it right here, but it says perceived, a conflict of interest perceived or otherwise, and that's in the Code of Conduct that councillors are not to act on issues that are in conflict of interest.
So that broadens the scope beyond pecuniary interest.
Well, yes, it does. Whereas the Municipal Act is essentially a pecuniary interest issue. And that's what I look at, but I do rely on the provisions of the Conflict of Interest Act to give me some sense of, is it a conflict, is it not? And I provide opinions on that.
Okay, so finally, you heard Councillor Whitehead's comments with regards to leaving it at 60 days and modifying the language so that it's much the same as the proposed bylaw here, that you would still come before us and advise us that there's a need to extend. Your comments on that?
I can work within any time frame you place. I looked at the 120 days as something that would cover. 60 days is a little tough to get something finished within 60 days. But it is doable if it's a very minor investigation. But the 120 days I thought was a little more realistic, but I can work with it.
Then how would you imagine this working then if it was 60 days and you're coming up, in day 45 that you're not going to make the 60? You would come to council and advise that you're not going to make the timeline?
I provide a report to council of that issue, and at the timeline would be extended.
And the interim report, does it identify what the complaint is? Doesn't indicate
There's no
anything?
identification, and that's because the Municipal Act requires, under section 223(5), that confidentiality and secrecy be maintained, and there be no facts of any sort are brought out, including who the councillor is or who the complainant is.
So ultimately, the 60 days would still stand then in this case. That's the council, in essence, trying to keep some tension in the system. And you acknowledge there may be a need for that, but it's still within your mandate to come back and indicate that you're advising us it's going to take longer, and that's the end of it for council. There's nothing council can do at that particular point, according to the act. Is that correct?
Well, one of the, I think you brought it up, was the current bylaw to ask council for an extension.
Yeah, we're changing
And
that.
one of the issues I had with the clerk was that, what if council says no? Now what do we do? And,
Yeah, I think we probably would never do that, given that we would
I-
find
I
ourselves in
don't-
court.
I agree, I don't think you would, but
But I think that original intention was that we wanted to keep that tension, intention was to keep that tension in the system so that the public knows we're trying to minimize the cost, not create a monster. Okay, so I'm happy with the amendment, Mr. Chairman, that is being proposed. The language remains the same as what's in here, just switching 120 to 60. It provides that he's going to give advice to us with the reasons for his inability to prepare the file and the report and the date on which it would be prepared and filed with the council. I still think the system is worthwhile. I think far too often, the Integrity Commissioner program is being judged on the completed files that come in, and, you know, it's deemed that the counselors aren't getting their wrists slapped, or perhaps some people would like it, like in Shakespeare's days, where there's a pound of flesh extracted for the offense. But we gave you that authority, and so you're the one that would have to ultimately be held accountable and make the statements. And there is no interaction between you and council or staff in terms of what your recommendations are. You're making that on your own. So I'm still pleased with the overall process, but I think I'm with Councillor Whitehead on the 60 days. I think that still makes sense, and we can work the language around it. Given that the vast majority, based on the numbers you're well under the 60 days when you look at everything that you're doing on all those items. It's just the 2 or 3 bigger ones that come in that become problematic, so I'm fine with that, sir.
If I, through the chair, I have found that I am independent. Council does not interfere with what I do. Now, the council is certainly interested in what I'm doing when a complaint has been made against them, but they do not interfere with what I do, and I adjudicate on my own.
And to be perfectly clear, you don't tell councillors who you're investigating except for the individual councillor.
Exactly.
So I don't know who you're investigating currently, and I don't even know the number of cases. None of us do, unless you tell us in this type of setting. So we're completely excluded from it, and perhaps as surprised as others when the report comes in. Okay.
I'll take the chair back, and actually, I'm going to keep pass the chair back.
Okay.
How many integrity commissioners are currently in Ontario?
Wow.
How many cities have integrity commissioners? At least may have the answer.
Through the chair, it's roughly 30, it goes up and down a little.
And now, some of them using the ombudsman, or are they all independent
No,
integrity
no,
commissioners?
the ombudsman does not have the authority to do this. None are the provincial ombudsman.
The second piece was going to add is there some cases that delay the process that might be extraneous, completely extraneous to the case that's being investigated.
Yes, I have one case right now in which the investigation is complete. I can't put in the report until such time as a secondary process is completed. That secondary process is outside the purview of what I do and what the city does. It's related to the complaint, and my fear is that my report may affect that process in some way. And I'm really concerned that if I put my report out, there may be some effect on that. And my report should not affect any other process outside of what I do, and which is enforce the code of conduct.
I just want to highlight that because hypothetically, I'm not going to get to that, but you could have a subsequent court case going on, and the investigation and the conclusion of the investigation before the court case is concluded could actually have an impact on what's taking place in the courts, hypothetically. So I just want to highlight that there are other types of individual circumstances that may impact your timing on coming forward. So I want to highlight that. The other thing I want to highlight is, no question, I know I've utilized Mr. Bassey advice on a number of occasions, so it's not just about complaints, it is in fact about education, it is about, and that's the stuff that the general public don't necessarily get to see or may not even understand the value behind that. But for me, the real value for me is the ability that I can go to somebody independent and seek advice and then follow that advice accordingly. And without that, then you're basically on your own. So you've got the comfort of having an integrity commission to go to and get a sense on whether you're on the right trail relative to an issue that you're addressing, or if you need to change your approach. So I think that is where the real value is. This other stuff is the surface, but I think the value part to me, as a counselor, is the educational component. And clearly, I'm hearing that you're also providing contacts with the general public as well, and informing and educating them. So clearly, that would be invaluable as well. So I think it's not just about investigations and complaints to me, it's the whole complete package that we have to look at when we talk about integrity, Commissioner. So those are my comments. I will be, I have to stay way outside the chair because I want to move the amendment. That is, we maintain 60 days, but we move Amendment 2, which is the clear language, so you don't have to be in fear of the council being in a position to say no. This is just to advise us that more time is needed. So at this point, I'd move to
Mr. Chair, seconded for the amendment. Mr. Pearson, Councilor Pursuit. Councilor Pursuit. Any comments on the amendment? No. So just to be clear on the clear language, that's just giving Lisa directions to look at the language and make sure that it's in plain, simple language to the public. Is that what the intent is?
absolutely.
Okay, excellent. All those in favor?
Carried.
Any opposed? Chair is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bassett.
Thank you.
Thank you, staff. We are now concluded item 5.1. I see nothing else on the agenda. Is there any other business? Madam Clerk? No other business, so at this point, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Question, Mr. Chairman, please.
Absolutely.
Can we, Madam Chair, remove the item B of the outstanding businesses today, that's the development of proactive disclosure of expense policy? Can that be removed today?
Well, it's going, from us, it's done, right?
Or what's it
It's
say?
going up, so
It won't
it's...
do anything.
So we can remove it.
So I'll move that that be removed today.
Second by Councillor Park. Remove item B. All those in favor?
Carried.
And while if I still have floor, Mr. Chairman, the item D, AOD requirements, we're showing Q2, are we going to change that?
Madam Clerk?
Because I'm assuming we're getting into
Q2 2014. Second
I assume
quarter.
staff doesn't have it, so we should probably change that. Does staff have another deadline?
Close.
I don't know, is there staff here?
The staff's not
We're
here.
not-
We don't know.
Okay, so we
can
have,
well, then, can we move it up to Q3 and ask staff who's responsible for this to get us a report on it?
could I just ask why would we move to Q3 if we could still do Q2?
Oh, we're getting awfully close.
We are, but I don't know where they are.
Could we ask staff then where it is on their timing?
Yeah, can you find that? We can also amend that accordingly, but if they're ready to go and it just didn't appear today, I'd like to know that.
Okay.
Okay, any other discussion? Seeing none, a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilor Pierce, second by Councilor Clark. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you.